pleased you're all getting along so well. My name's Mary P. Mills. I'm a partner and editor at Tortoise. Welcome to Tortoise. Welcome to our newsroom if you've not been before. If you have been before, this is all going to sound like, I do see some familiar faces. This is all going to sound unbearably familiar, but I have to go through it for those who are new to Tortoise this evening. Welcome to a ThinkIn. A ThinkIn is not a panel event. It might look like that to start with, but a ThinkIn is loosely based on a news organisation, news conference, and it's a system of organised listening where you get a group of experts together and other people to debate an interesting topic and idea of the moment. In this instance, how we find love today. I should say that it's not a find love event. I hope you're not all going to stand up and walk out when I say that. I can't guarantee that you are going to walk out onto East Castle Street tonight and find your great love, the great love of your life. But I do hope that we will get to a better understanding of the dating and relationship landscape as a result of this evening. And we'll do that with your contribution, and that will get us to a better informed point of view and journalism that we may well commission as a result of this conversation. So please do chip in. We do have one rule. Even though we want you to chip in, we do have a rule which is no questions, but that's because we want to hear your point of view. We don't want you to hide behind a question, as people often do when they actually really have something to say. Bit of housekeeping before I introduce our guests. We love you talking about us on social media, but not during the event, so please can you turn off your phones if you haven't already. This is a timer called Agatha. A little tortoise called Agatha who makes her way across the screen from left to right over the course of an hour. At the end, a little flag goes up. So if you do have something to say, keep an eye on Agatha and stick your hand in the air. And I have to tell you that you're being filmed and recorded with these little robot cameras for our members who couldn't be here but might want to tune in and see it. So first of all, to introduce our guests, we've got Susie Godson right here, who is a sex and relationships columnist. She's been a columnist for The Times for 16 years, so she knows everything, and I told her just before she arrived she must have amazing sex as a result. Sorry, Susie. We've got Rachel Lloyd, who's a relationships expert for the online dating platform eHarmony and a trained life coach, and Stephen Gross, who is a psychoanalyst and author of the excellent book, The Examined Life. I'm just going to come to the audience before I go to these guys. Can I just have a quick show of hands? How many people here are single? Really pleased I established that thing at the start. How many here of those people find dating in the current landscape difficult? They think it's difficult? Probably two-thirds of those people. And how many people here think the dating landscape has changed for the better over the last sort of 10 to 20 years? It's got easier, you can find people easily, you know who's single.
There's two over there.
Okay, there's a lot of some of you were live 20 years ago. A couple of hands over there, great, thank you. Like 20 years ago, but and how many people think it's changed for the worse? And how many people just don't know? Okay, fine, great, thank you. So I'm just going to start by showing a slide, and all of these slides I'm going to show, except for one, is in this handy little booklet guide, which is this ThinkIn is part of a series of 3 ThinkIns. This is how do we find love, and then how do we keep love, and how do we get over love. And so this booklet covers all of those ThinkIns. This is a really fascinating graph, if everyone can see it. It shows that sort of really marked change in how we meet people between 2009 and 2017. A massive sort of drop-off through friends, a big drop-off through co-working, which I imagine is even more pronounced post Me Too, and a huge peak in people meeting online. And actually, it's quite unclear to me about the people who meet in the bar or restaurant. It might also be people who've met online and arranged to meet in a bar and a restaurant in answering that survey. But I think that's really interesting. That's heterosexual couples. The next slide is just the same, just shows the same. That bottom right is online for same-sex couples and the sort of drop-off in the same areas. Susie, I talked to all the speakers before they came, and we talked about how this change. You have anxieties about the abundance of choice that comes with online dating. Would you just talk about that for a moment?
Yeah. choice is a paradox, actually, because if you ask anyone, would you like to choose between 2 things or between 5 things? Everyone will say, well, I'd like to have the option of having 5 choices. But actually, choice makes things more difficult, not less difficult, because if you think about it mathematically, if you have to choose between 2 things, you have a 50% chance of liking what you get. If you have to choose between 5 things, you only have a 20% chance of maybe liking what you get. And in an experiment where an American psychologist set up some little shops within supermarkets, and she was selling jam. And on one stall, she had 28 types of jam, and on another stall, she had just 6 types of jam. And then they just measured how many jams were sold from each stall. And the stall that only had 6 jams sold stratospherically more jam than the one that had 20-something types of jam. And the reason is that choice overwhelms us. We can't rationally take in, massive amounts of information, and we find it much easier to make a decision when we're looking at a much more selective or filtered amount of information. And that is exactly why when you're swiping through Tinder at a pace and you are, running past all these people going, no, 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 because you think, I can't do that one because there must be something better. And it's actually why porn works as well. It's exactly how porn works, is that this motorized mechanism within you that is looking for more and makes it very, very difficult to settle. And so the only way that online dating can really work is if you take it offline as quickly as possible.
Oh, right, okay, that's an interesting one. And you told me you've got, millennial daughters and you see them doing this swipey, swipey, swipe thing. And, you say you can't possibly connect emotionally with people.
Well, you can't. I mean, you can't. I mean, in your little book, it shows you all the kind of the key responses which everybody has worked out.
Oh yeah.
Get the most hits on Tinder or on Hinge.
I think that so the next slide should show you the number of Tinder users. So this is the sort of, the jams. Look at how many jams, and the slide after this, which is sort of, I think, crowdsourced from some of my colleagues, is the most heinous dating app cliches in here. So don't ever use them. You can refer back to them, which I really liked. The sort of I'll fall for you if you push me or whatever. Looking for someone who doesn't take themselves too seriously. These are all the sort of brilliant cliches, and you say they're finely honed.
Absolutely, and also, all the evidence shows that, people put photos up that make them look their best. You're presenting a false self, so you're choosing between 200 false selves. It's a crazy system, and it's amazing that it works as well as it does. But I will say that the AI does work, because my millennial daughter, who broke up from her boyfriend, when she did go on Hinge, was matched with her ex-boyfriend every time she went on.
Rachel, you're from eHarmony, but you still see the sort of limits of online dating and how difficult it is and a sort of drain on our time.
I mean, online dating is tough. You do need to have a certain amount of courage, and obviously it gives us more choice. It's easier to meet people now via online dating. You can meet people that live a long way away from you, different ages. You can make specific kind of, this is what I'm looking for type checklists. But I would agree that there is an abundance, there's a paradox of too much choice. And we see this with the boom in the free apps and, the swipe culture that we're now in. Now, I've been told not to talk too much about our brand, because that would not be, an open field. But I would say that platforms that specialise, your traditional paid sites that specialise more in compatibility matching are probably a better option for people looking for long-term relationships. That's not to say you can't find them on the Hinges and the Bumbles and all the rest of it, but I think you've got to be careful about how you use them. It's very easy to get sucked into that. There's always someone better. Let's just keep going. There's always a better option. What we try to do on our site is encourage people to dwell on the site, to really look at profiles. But it's interesting because we used to do what we call daily matches. So you would join us and we would give you like what we thought were your most compatible matches. But people actually, once the sort of Bumbles of the world and the Tinders took off, people railed against that because they were like getting used to having a multitude of choices. So we now sort of opened up our offering so that you can basically cruise the site and see who you like. We don't deliver to you handmade matches. So it is kind of symptomatic of the society we live in, is that we want that choice, but it can handicap us a bit.
But when you say compatibility, is that your algorithm or whatever matching someone who likes walking with someone who likes walking?
No, because that's really basic.
Yeah.
And some of them do that. Some of the apps say they specialise in compatibility, and obviously I've been on all of them because that's part of what I have to do to see what the competition are up to. But they're very sort of baseline things like, I mean, remember a lot of these have machine learning. So if I say I like someone with brown eyes who's 6'2", or I keep liking or dwelling on those profiles, I will see more of those people. But you know, the more sophisticated compatibility algorithms are actually, there's quite a lot of science. It's psychometrically designed. And for instance, we have 32 dimensions of compatibility, everything from your levels of extroversion to, I don't know, how adaptable you are, your conflict resolution skills. And all I will do, I could go on for hours, but that would not be fun for you lot. So I would say what we've found is that the more alike you are, the more you have the same values and view of the world, the better the chance of success for a long-term relationship. So if you could clone yourself, you'd be very happy. It works.
I'm just going to show the next slide so we don't become an eHarmony advert.
Yeah.
Where it just shows the different dating platforms and the numbers of users, as subscribers. I'm going to pick on these gentlemen over here since they forcefully put their hand up. Stephen, I'm going to come to you in a second, but I'm just going to go to these gentlemen here, forcefully put their hand up to say, yes, it's much better than it was. Would one of you speak to your view of why things are improved?
Just a little bit concerned that it might be a kind of pile-on against dating apps. And as a young gay man, when I was looking back, maybe when I was 16 or 15, I would have felt hugely. I mean, I'm of the generation that grew up with these apps.
Mm.
How
old are you?
Certainly, I'm 27.
And what's your name, sorry?
Ben.
If everyone would say their name, that would be super helpful.
And certainly online dating. And growing up in a relatively big, relatively progressive city, I still would have, at the age of 16, 17, felt hugely isolated as a young gay man if there hadn't been access to...
So it's part of the liberation of same-sex couples and, you know, over the last sort of 10 and same-sex dating over the last sort of 15 years or whatever.
Yeah, and I would also say, as someone who is happily partnered now, these apps still play a really important role in the gay community, just for establishing friendships and establishing, you know, we recently found a queer running group, you know. There are all kinds of things whereas previously the gay community was quite reliant on environments like bars, places where it's kind of very alcohol-driven, etc. So
and if that wasn't your scene,
then you're stuck for finding people like you. So.
Okay. I would also say, so my name's Hamish, that through these apps, I've met people from all walks of life that I would never have met normally through work or through university. And I think that what the apps do is allow you to meet people completely beyond your circle, and that can be really interesting, really refreshing.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to just come to Stephen before I come to the room, but do stick your hand up in the air and I will come to you. But Stephen, you say with these apps, you know, that we are making a mistake in talking about love here. What we're actually really talking about and what we find online is infatuation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to... it can be
Yeah.
meeting someone online. But the whole... To me, it's infatuation, sexual attraction, it's passion. And love is something quite different. And the very things that, you know, Susie and Rachel were pointing out, the externalness of the qualities and the focus takes you away from the really difficult process of what love's about, which is loss, and this is loss of illusion about oneself that maybe one's not the person they thought they were, attractive or something, or even the person that you're with and having to give up certain ideas about them. And for an analyst, all of love is linked to, from the very beginning of life, we're born, we give up the womb, we come to the breast, then we have to give that up to have solid foods, we have to give that up to go into the life with our mother, to go into nursery. All of life, we give up things to have the new thing. And there's a whole process in each of that which links love to actually mourning and to grief and to giving things up. And with each relationship, we have to, and this is why I work with patients who are often startled when they come to their wedding and they're quite anxious and sad. But of course, they're giving up their parents, they're giving up friends and perhaps other people they might have dated and had relationships with to be with this person. It's a very, very complicated process, but it involves not just excitement and the fun bit that comes at the beginning, is, I tend to think of it, of infatuation and all that, and excitement and sexual passion. But real love involves, and it can, and when I looked at the title too, of how do we find love, I've seen couples have been married who have not loved each other and then work their way back to loving each other in an incredibly profound way. So it can be that you can find love sometimes, in things which you thought had died. And it's a very complicated thing. Or with relationships, which then come back and are very alive. So for an analyst, it has more in common sometimes with mourning.
Okay.
And the crucial thing, by which I mean that we see ourselves more, at the end of mourning, we have to see the world more objectively, and love should help us to see ourselves and others more objectively.
All right.
And I think, just one last thing with it. The reason for that, why that's important, is I actually think it leads to more freedom. If you see yourself more clearly, you get a clear idea of what you want in the world.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. I just want to show the next slide, and I'm going to then, which should be about our changing attitudes towards online dating, which is one of the reasons I asked at the start about whether people's views had changed in some way. I'm going to come to my colleague here who happens to be on the slides. Hello. Hello, Zab. You wrote a really interesting piece. Zab actually wrote a really interesting piece for Tortoise about dating previously, and he says his view of online dating has changed exactly as mirroring this sort of, in a more positive direction. Would you tell us why?
Yeah.
Would you also, we all naturally mic, which is to say that we don't have mics, so please could you also
yeah, of course.
Speak up as much as possible.
So I wrote the article in last March, I think, and the article came out of a thinking which we did in the January or February, where we were talking about dating, and at the time I was happily single, and I think the point I made was that one of the difficulties with dating apps and their existence and some of the social pressures around them is that it can sometimes kind of confuse you when you're happily single into thinking that you shouldn't be content with just, being single, and that there's this constant, basically the existence of dating apps constantly, puts you under a kind of fear of missing out, pressure to use them. I think the way for me it changed was I became less happily single and more, I want to find a relationship. And I think when I moved into that phase, I did think dating apps became kind of more useful for that and more helpful when you're kind of in that phase. But two things to add to that. One is that I only found that with Hinge in particular, I thought other dating apps just really didn't kind of suit me or suit the person I was looking for. So I think this stat, I think partially the change might be that there's far more choice in apps, and every app does offer something slightly different. I think that maybe marks some of the change. Mm-hmm. And then a second thing to add.
There's more bespoke.
Pardon?
There's more bespoke options for online dating,
exactly.
but
More bespoke options.
And sometimes it's a really subtle thing. So on Hinge, I think it's the fact that generally you can respond to answers rather than responding to pictures, and so it's easier to start a conversation because you just respond to something which someone said. But then the second thing to add to that is I spent 6 or 7 months on Hinge, now have not used Hinge in a few months, and I thought that Hinge was really good because I kept going on kind of dates and would get 2 or 3 dates in. But then in hindsight, I'm still single. And so, yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
I feel like there's a room that wants to go,
But it is interesting because the process of talking to someone and then going on a date, then going on a second date, going on a third date, is often, a month-long process. And then if it doesn't work out on the third date, you have a couple of weeks where you're like, God, this is exhausting, you forget that. And then you go back. And 6 months have gone by and you've had six people who you've met where you've had 3 or 4 dates with them. And it's really nice and it's fun at the time. And you think, well, this app works for me. And then you're still single. So,
does anyone else have sort of similar experiences of that? There's a hand there. Do say your name, please.
Hello, I'm Diora. I'm a journalist.
Say that again, sorry?
I'm Diora.
Diora. Hi.
I'm a journalist. So, funnily enough, my last serious relationship was from a guy I met on Tinder. And we were together for 1.5 years, so obviously it worked quite well. But I think the main thing about that was that we didn't really talk much on it. Like, we just agreed to meet up quite straight away. So I didn't really project onto him. But I found that with apps like Hinge, you have a lot more about, you have the questions and the answers and you have the 6 pictures, but it's so easy to construct sort of this persona that you want, and I guess everyone does that, and we mentioned that before, but it's also so much easier to project onto someone or have a false idea of what they might be like, and I think sometimes you just keep getting disappointed, or the other person might be disappointed because they might not be how they pictured you to be. Does that make sense? So I feel like there's a lot about projection.
That speaks to Susie's point about taking it offline as quick as possible, not doing the long-term sort of jokey email flirtation.
Yeah, and so last year I was doing this thing for a podcast I was on. I basically went on a date each week, which was...
For how long?
For like 10 weeks. It was a long time. And it became so exhausting, and it became the same, and it was just like, wow, and it really, because I was like, let me do this like being single and like having the best fun. And then I just deleted it. I just deleted the app, and I never felt more relieved, and I think I just felt so good about...
You deleted Tinder?
Yeah, Hinge.
All of them?
Exactly, and there's a really good book called The Unexpected Joy of Being Single. And I read that last year, and it just touched on so many societal pressures. Like, it's so interesting how you said, sorry, I forgot your name, but you said that you went on a couple dates, and then, you were still single, and everyone reacted like, oh, but why is that our reaction? Like, why?
That was actually nodding, because that was his initial thing.
Right. No, but like, do you know what it means? It just feels like, why?
Okay.
We're all so inclined to feel sorry for someone who's sick, and that's the kind of pressure that makes you re-download the apps, because you're like, fucking hell, what's wrong with me? Sorry.
Nothing wrong with you, Dior.
Hi, my name is Aditi. I was a late adopter, admittedly, to all of the dating apps. And so I think the advantage it gave me is that when I got on, I had a bunch of advice from girlfriends about do's and don'ts on it, which I think was really helpful. I think the thing that I want to challenge is that because it's only pictures, we're being superficial, or we're only assessing on superficial traits. Because, I have degrees in psychology and social work. Pictures to me are telling me so much about the person, about how they are choosing to present themselves. If these are the pictures that they pick about themselves, and so they're physical. They're images, yes, but I think there's so much more that can be discerned from just pictures than I think is traditionally associated with being on the apps. So,
what's your name?
Aditi.
Sorry?
Aditi.
Aditi. And would you just give us a really quick, you said you had a bunch of really helpful advice from your friends, do's and don'ts. Give us some quick do's and don'ts.
Absolutely. So I think the best piece of advice that I got was that you only do this for as long as it feels like a game. The minute that you start to get emotionally invested, and I will say, so when I moved here about a little over a year ago, I was like, let's see what this place has to offer, because I was coming from a place where there were a lot of men, but not very dateable men.
Well, now we want to know where that was, obviously.
Huh?
Where was that?
San Francisco.
I live there for 2 years, that's so true.
So,
The truest thing. Wait, there's a great saying about men in San Francisco.
the odds are good, but the goods are odd.
The odds are good, but the goods are odd.
Which is not to say that there are very lovely people there, but I just didn't find that it was very conducive for dating. So when I moved here, I challenged myself to actually go on 1 to 2 dates a week just to see what it was going to be like, and it was my first time on the apps. So the advice was, do not get invested in it. Treat it as a game. The minute that it becomes more than a game, you have to give space. Take it offline immediately, like as fast as you can, because the longer you're on text, the less likely it is going to be to go offline. For me personally, 1 date is all it takes. I actually prefer for it not to be anything alcohol related, because if the person needs alcohol to be interesting, then that's telling me a lot about them. Yeah, I mean, I guess being a late adopter means that, like, I've really gone into this being very comfortable with the fact that I'm not partnered. I can walk away being very comfortable being not partnered. If it works out, that's great, and if not, I can remain just as happy and detached from it. I did end up being in a relationship for almost 9 months from someone that I met on Tinder. So there, you know, it can happen. But yeah, my point was that I wanted to challenge that it's a superficial exercise, because I think pictures say a lot more than we give them credit for.
Okay. So there's a hand back there in white, and then there's the gentleman here in black. Hi.
Hi. So I just
Would you talk loudly, because you're quite far back?
I actually have quite a loud voice as well. I just wanted to say that I did use dating apps myself and had nothing but good experiences from them, because I don't know, I just didn't do it with like the mentality of I'm going to meet my husband on this. I literally put a face mask on, a bathrobe, have some wine, sit with my roommate and like have a chat with people online. And it was a really good laugh. Like,
wait, I'm going to interrupt you. You put the face mask on, one of those creepy face masks?
Yeah.
For your profile picture?
Yeah.
For your profile picture?
My profile picture like, to the nines.
You say you did this on the date?
No, oh my god. At home, yeah. Like watching Love Island.
Okay, fine.
It's the best of both worlds. So I just do think there should be like a bit of tongue-in-cheekness in like the use of dating apps. Like I wouldn't meet someone at a bar and be like, this is the one. Like you kind of have to like go with it. And also, just side note, it's not just strangers. The guy that I'm dating at the moment, I've actually known for years, and we actually matched on Bumble, and he was like, oh my god, like it's you. And we've been dating, so it is like a way to like reopen that door.
Okay. What's your name?
Maria.
Maria, thank you, Maria. And the gentleman here.
So I'm a writer. I've just written a book about internet.
Would you say your name as well?
Ben.
And would you also speak up as well? Sorry.
So I've just written a book about internet dating, and it documents my story of doing it and some of the conclusions that I came to. And one of those is that one of the hardest things to work out when you're trying to find somebody is psychological compatibility. It's the big, most difficult thing. And what I worked out, even in terms of what we're referring to here about meeting somebody, that actually I worked out that there are 5 different and conflicting intentions that people have within online dating. So we presume that everybody wants to meet either for a relationship, let's say, or for sex. But actually there are 3 other intentions that are in play at the same time. So for example, there are people who just want to look at photos and they don't do anything else. They may be people who are psychologically not ready to engage in terms of when they might have broken up with somebody, let's say. Then there are people who want to look at pictures and then swipe in order to get attention, to reboot their self-esteem, perhaps.
Affirmation or whatever.
Right. And then there are people who want to look, swipe, and then talk, almost like pen pals. So, and then you've got the people who want to meet for relationships, and then you've got ones who want to meet for sex.
Yeah.
But that's 5 different groups that are all swimming around in the same barrel.
So what's impossible to know when you're looking at a picture is which one of the 5 you're communicating with. So if you're looking to meet somebody and have a relationship, you could be communicating with somebody who just wants to look and nothing else. And that explains why we get lots of cross purposes with people, say, messaging somebody who doesn't message back, say, for example. And so what the apps, and indeed us, are not good at is being able to find out if the person's psychological intention is the same as ours.
I mean, but I take your point, and I think you're absolutely right, but surely 'twas ever thus, you know, if you met someone in a bar 20 years ago, that would have been the same case. You never know whether you're on the same page as someone until later on.
The dosages are magnified. That's the difference.
Say
So
that
you're
again?
talking about a one-on-one.
Yeah.
Thousands of people. It's
Yeah.
a different proposition in terms of the impact it might have on you.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a hand here.
I'm Rachel. Hello. One of the things I remember reading a few years ago, Susan Cain's book on introverts, and you mentioned introversion. And I would consider myself a pretty good extroverted introvert. And I feel like the current climate and the current, I remember saying, like, explaining something like, I'm living in the wrong century, basically, because we've come from this kind of Victorian, like, era of character that she talks about, something that's more based on personality. So, and I feel like the online dating world is very much set up for a culture of extroverts. And as someone who, I'm a weird millennial, I've never online dated, I've always met people in person. And I don't think I would have selected my partners on an online dating app. I wouldn't have chosen those people. So I think there's something around how this system favors people who are extroverted, which I think maybe says something about how we are currently as a society favoring extroversion.
Can I just say something?
Absolutely.
The only thing is, there is dating apps for introverts, dating apps for Muslims, dating apps for, you know, blind people, dating apps for absolutely every specific category. So, you know, that the main apps cater to, you know, bigger audiences. But if, you know, if you're niche, it exists.
I suppose if I'm an introvert, I'm not necessarily looking for another introvert. So if I'm on an introverted app, I wouldn't necessarily go, I want to meet someone else like that.
It's join a gardening app. I'm just saying, like, it's so broad spectrum now. But the other thing that I find interesting is there's like 20 people in this room who are single. Why are you not going out with each other? I mean, why is it all different?
You can stay as long as you like, there's wine.
You know, it's crazy. It's like, why are we ignoring what's all around us?
And yeah, I mean, I know people who've met at parties and liked each other, but waited until they were then matched, like your daughter and her boy, on Tinder before they went out on a date. Rachel, can I just ask you something? How old are you?
I'm 32.
32. Sorry, no, this Rachel. You look wonderful. You're 32, did you say? And you've never done online dating? Never downloaded it? Never?
I had 8 years of relationships that were all people I met in person. I had 2 long-term relationships back to back. So I'm literally only just now kind of wading into that world, but not seriously.
So are you actively resisting? Would be one of
No, I think it's that happily single thing as well.
Yeah. Okay. And there's a hand up here.
Hi, my name's Kevin. Sort of off the back of the intentions points. So I've had a really successful relationship, 3 years that I met, where I met someone on an app. And I think one of the things that I want to touch on is the second point, how we keep relationships or how we keep love today. I think with the availability of people on dating apps, etc., I think that it can often exacerbate problems in relationships. And I think as a result, if you're in a monogamous relationship, cheating is much more common. And that's actually a very big downside of dating apps today.
So you think it exacerbates the worst in us, the sort of tendency to look elsewhere?
I think so, yeah.
Is that true, Susan?
Not in my experience. I would say, you know, if you look at marriage, it's a coin toss, whether it's going to work or whether it's going to, you know, we've got a 42% divorce rate, so risk is always there. People, if you look at why people divorce, they will say, oh, you know, we grew apart, but actually the reality is one person was generally cheating. Their whole way divorce is structured is so that people lie, and so you know, all those stats are nonsense. I think the reality is most people, you know, we are a bit like prairie voles. You know, we are pretty monogamous. We want to be happy with someone. We're fairly invested in that, and most people don't want to cheat, and most people do want to be with one person. So you know, if you're the kind of person whose, you know, head is turned quite easily, yes, there's loads of opportunity out there. But the majority of us just really aren't like that.
Yeah, can I just say, I was, as a young person in the 90s, there were always the type of people that were sort of cheaters. We used to call them womanizers, but that's gender specific. And it was always, you never really knew what you were getting if you met in a sort of bar or, you know, through friends was always better. But I think these characters have always existed, the people that can't commit, the people that have difficulty being monogamous. There might be more opportunity now to play around through the apps, but you probably find those people were always kind of going to go in that direction. Because I think, essentially, isn't it in the wonderful sort of brochure that you've done, 61% of people online dating are looking for a relationship, and I think that's really encouraging. They're not looking for a one-night stand, so...
And most people who have one-night stands are hoping it will be a two-night stand and a three-night stand.
There was that hand there, and then.
Hi, I'm Olivia. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm single and that I am looking for love when I go on the apps. I always throw around the phrase, "I'm my love of my life." I've had a fair few experiences on dating apps, been on Bumble, Hinge, Tinder, everything in between. One occasion I went on a date with a personal trainer who told me he could get me to shake the next day, which was great. One occasion I went on a date with a guy whose girlfriend showed up. That was also great. The worst part was that the girlfriend was weirdly happy that I was there. I think they were hoping for some sort of three-way. So I gave up all the apps. Then I applied to be on first dates. This was my last final attempt. I got through to the final, I think it was the second round of first dates 2 years later, only to be rejected by them as well. So not even the app. And then I sent them an email when I was drunk one evening, being like, "I'm still really single as fuck, can you find me a man?" And they never replied. So I basically tried it all. And my biggest issue is that there isn't actually an alternative. And whilst these apps I don't think are fruitful when it comes to finding, you know, long-term partners, if you're not on them, you're not going to engage people because people are too scared now to go up to people in bars like how they used to. And I've even done it myself, like been to a bar and gone up to guys I found attractive. I'm not afraid of doing that. I mean, one occasion this guy started dancing with the girl 5 minutes later, and another one shagged someone else. So, you know, I'm doing all that I can. I'm sounding a bit desperate here. I'm doing but there isn't an alternative is the problem for me.
It's really interesting what you say there, Olivia, because actually one of the reasons, the sort of inspiration for this series, and in fact this, you know, particular thinking, was one, that really interesting graph that showed the change at the start, but also we had another event on masculinity which I hosted, and one of the gentlemen there said, you know, I feel really annoyed that I can't just walk up to a sort of beautiful woman in a park, he said, and say you're beautiful and approach her, and he was, you know, sort of middle-aged, and a much younger girl standing at the back there said, "You cannot do that. The only way to approach people is on Tinder, because then you know that there's consent, you know, that's basically stalking." And I was really struck by that total change and massive disagreement. And, you know, you'd like to think that that somewhere in the middle is the right way, and it's just quite interesting that you're obviously quite young, Olivia, and but you also feel like it annoyed that this is becoming your only.
Yes, definitely. But I'm trying everything else. That's like, there isn't an alternative.
Okay, I'm going to go to Ben again. And then
can I just say,
it's Ben, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's interesting also is the way that the apps have actually changed behaviour. So, for example, Happen, that app, you can geolocate so that somebody who walks past you, if you're both on the app, they pop up on your phone, let's say, for example. So as a man, that reduces the incentive, removes the incentive for you to go up to that person and say hello. So if the person is on the app, where there is less risk, let's say, than if you would go up in person, men are now defaulting to that. So the man's perspective is, why should I risk rejection if 10 people are swiping right on me on Tinder? And so the female friends I speak to, they say they are already noticing changes in behaviour when they're out socially, that men are not making the approaches they made 5 years ago.
And is that welcome? I mean, ladies of the room, are we happy with that? Well, I mean, genuine question.
I guess there's so much gray area between what is a welcome and unwelcome thing, because even like that middle-aged man's example of being at the park and going up to tell a woman that she's beautiful, I've been in that situation. And even if this was pre-dating apps, that still would not have led anywhere, because you can still do that in a way that is still very unwelcoming. At the risk of sounding like a really old person, I think to a large extent the art of conversation is very, it's just something that's increasingly less easy to to come across, I think. I think that is more of, don't open a conversation with, "You're so beautiful." There's like so many other things, so many other ways to start a conversation.
Yeah, I think I've heard a lot of people say like, "Oh, I don't know where the boundaries are now, I don't know how to make a move." But I just feel like all it requires is a little bit of emotional intelligence. Like, make a little move, a tiny, non-creepy move, and see how that goes down. And then people will, you can tell if someone's interested. I think the whole like playing hard to get culture has been really toxic, because then that assumes that like female passivity is like kind of leading someone else on, when if we can just accept that like women can be proactive as well, and it's not just like the men who have to make the first move, then it makes it a lot easier. And also then women feel more comfortable once they are on the receiving end of like slightly complimentary comment to like respond positively and like appreciate and take that on, rather than having to be all coy, which can, I think people say it's confusing.
There are a couple of other hands. Have I missed them, or okay? If not, I'm going to just quickly move on to, because Susie, I'm aware of time, and Susie, you did some really, I can see this is quite a young audience, but you did some really interesting work on middle-aged divorced women. Would you just talk a little moment about that?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of research looking at marriage and divorce, really, and I've done some studies with men and with women who were in very troubled marriages, and then I followed a group of women from when they filed for divorce through to their divorce and then out the other end. So it's a sort of longitudinal study. And the first bit of the study, which sort of looks at their history, and this is the case in actually all three different studies, and this is them looking back on their lives and why they got married. They're coming out of really long 30-year marriages, and they're all aged between sort of 55 and 65. And what is really pronounced about when they talk about how they met their partner is that none of them mentioned love. None of them mention, "Oh, we fell in love and it was really amazing." Now, they're looking back, obviously, from a place of distress, but they were all running away from something. They were either running away from difficult backgrounds, from abusive parents. Maybe they were aspirational. They were trying to sort of climb a ladder. They saw this as a way out of something or a way into something else. And I thought it was really interesting, because you can only see those things when you're looking back over time. And in the moment, in the now, this idea that there is the one, or that you'll find love, it's actually, when, Stephen's a better person probably to talk about this, on a subconscious level, you're also looking to meet another need in yourself, and nobody else can fill that gap for you. You sort of have to work out where you're at and what you're looking for. And these women can only see this now because they're so much older, and they're looking back at who they were when they were 18, 20 years old. And now their view, admittedly, they're all on dating apps. They're all saying that they don't want another relationship, and yet they're all on dating apps. But I think it's really interesting, because their world was very simple in comparison to your world, in that, they and in fact, traditionally, most people married somebody who lived within 20 blocks of where they grew up. They did a huge study in the United States, and the geographical neighborhood was where you met the person that you would eventually marry. And now this is all taken online and into these apps, and and because your generation were at the kind of cusp of, beginning with MySpace and into Facebook, and then the whole launch of the dating apps, it's kind of novel for you too. Whereas I think actually by the time our 14-year-old children are in their 20s and 30s, it will be much more natural for them because they've never known anything else. Whereas I think your generation probably have. But the point about what the research has told me is that this idea about love being the driving force, it generally isn't, but you can only see it through the rearview mirror.
Is that right, Stephen?
I mean, I was responding more emotionally. I was just thinking about things people said in the room, and I felt just how much rejecting and being rejected goes on with apps, and how much suffering actually will happen. And we're joking and we're laughing about things that people are saying, but actually a lot of unhappiness will be caused because it is difficult to be rejected or even to reject somebody else. So, I mean, that's sort of what I was thinking.
It's a marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's painful. That's not necessarily a bad thing if the suffering leads us to, if suffering leads to us better understanding ourselves and what we want and the person we want and the qualities we're looking for, compassion, kindness, a good person, and we get more and more clear about what we desire in the world, that's great. But if the suffering doesn't lead to knowledge about the heart, then it's terrible, yeah.
I just want to go back to, the fact that all these women that you've done this work with, they've gone online, they say, they're not going to, but they do, and we had that conversation about what a middle-aged woman tends to meet on an online dating app.
Well, I mean, that's, you're not at that stage yet, but there is, again, an imbalance in the population. So there's fewer men when you get into midlife, and there is more women. And because men date downwards, so men will typically date someone who's 5 to 15 years younger. Women are matched with men on Zimmer frames. And I'm sure Rachel can tell you a lot more about that.
Well, no, men do obviously date younger women. And the other thing, we did a big study with Oxford University, and it was like 150,000 profiles over 10 years. And I'm afraid there are some stereotypes that still exist. Men on our site prefer to date women who self-rate as an 8 out of 10, whereas women are just as happy with a 6 out of 10. And women are slightly more interested in dating.
Do you make people rate themselves out of 10?
Yeah, because when you join up, you give yourself ratings, yeah. And interestingly enough, people's ratings tend to be fairly accurate in the level of communication they receive. But women are 30% more interested in whether men are solvent as well. So there are some of those things, those old-fashioned ideas. And the age thing is another. Men do generally date younger women, that's for sure.
This is the moment I get to introduce my favourite slide of the evening, which is not in this book, but has personally struck me, which is Leonardo DiCaprio's refusing to date a woman over 25. The increasing line is Leonardo DiCaprio's age, and the dots at the bottom are the women that he's dated, never above 25. And in fact, in his recent years, where he is now in late 40s, they were 20 and 21. So there's Leonardo telling that story.
But I have 4 brothers, and one of them, he's in his 40s and dates women in his 20s, and then he complains that he feels like he's their therapist, that they look to him for life advice, and I'm like, but you're not going for someone mentally on the same page. So I don't think it necessarily works, but...
Tess has her hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mary. It's made me think, it's Tess from Tortoise. It's made me think 2 things. One, back to the middle-aged, I may or may not have recently got divorced and may or may not be dipping my toe into the terrifying world of dating apps when I haven't had a date for 25 years. But what strikes me is it's a kind of technical version of My Mate Fancies You. So it puts that little gap, back to your point, how do you approach people? Well, back in the 80s, you used to send your friend over, and it's sort of providing that bit of distance, and you don't actually have to make the approach yourself. The second thing it makes me realise about middle-aged women is going out there. You're looking for something really different at this stage. I don't need a husband, I don't need someone to father my children, I'm financially independent. You know, all the things I was looking for when I was in my 20s are completely different 20 years later. So that's kind of weirdly makes you feel about 18 again, because, you know, it's just fun now. And then the third thing that made me realise, well, I know we've talked about this before, Meripy, but we have to set up the Tortoise dating app. And we have to set it up, and it has to be called Shell Company, because we've already come up with the name. Because if you're saying, well, where do you meet people? Well, guys, we're all here.
We're all quite clearly desperate for you all to get together now. Yeah. Like, there's one thing that comes out of this evening. It's got to be a date somewhere. Okay, we're not. It's fine. You can do what you want.
Okay, we need to get to more than one glass each, apparently.
Are there any more hands? Because otherwise I'm going to... There's the lady.
Well, one of the things
Would you say your name? Sorry.
One of the things that strikes me kind of across what a lot of people have said is we keep talking about kind of infatuation versus love versus dating versus relationships, and often kind of conflate them. And for a lot of people, they're not necessarily at all the same. And I know I've seen kind of research on how many people who are on dating sites are actually looking for something and how many are doing it for fun in relation to sitting with your face mask and kind of swiping for fun. A lot of this doesn't have to be about looking for a long-term relationship, and looking for love doesn't need to be that you're looking for a relationship either, and vice versa. In relation to kind of 50 years ago, people might go into a relationship not looking for love. So I think picking those things apart will make quite a lot of things quite a bit easier.
What did you say your name was?
Nana.
Nana. Thank you, Nana. Any other hands?
I was going to say that I think the way people get over love, I know that's probably skipping a few stages, but the way people get over love as well is very different, and that influences how people find love. Like the guy that my mum was dating before she met my dad, like she was dating him like quite seriously a few months before she met my dad. Didn't want to see him anymore, so just called up BT and cut off the phone line. She's like the OG ghoster.
Off her own phone line?
Yeah, she called up, cut the phone line off, and then moved in with my dad, and that was it.
Brilliant.
Literally never saw him.
She invented ghosting. That is amazing.
Pretty iconic, but now I think you're constantly haunted by the past and comparing yourself to the people that came before that person that you just met, or how the person that you were with is doing, and you can see who you've just followed and what photos they've liked, and you can see them growing, and I think that often impacts like how you find love.
Okay. What's your name?
Bella.
Bella, thank you. And there's a hand at the back.
I was just going to add to that, because I think the one thing that does make dating on dating apps harder is that as soon as you get a last name, you're like, all right, Facebook, LinkedIn. It makes you like a lot more closed-minded, and I've had more fun on dating apps here because I just moved here, and like when I see like, oh, you're from this town and you went to this university, that doesn't really mean anything to me. Whereas in the States, I'd be like, oh, went to University of Michigan and is from Iowa, no way. Or like, I think it's interesting because having more information, I think, doesn't always lead you to happier results, because you end up being way more judgmental, and then you also outsource a lot more. Like I find that I'll send a name to, like, if back home, if I knew a friend had gone to that university, I'd be like, oh, do you know anything about this person we just matched? And then they'd be like, no, but I see that they've been a part of these clubs, and that means this stuff. So I just think more information tends to make you more closed-minded, I think.
And so do you feel liberated here, not knowing anything about our university? Because I can tell you all about it.
It's great. Yeah, it's been really great. So, that's not true. 50% of the time it's been great.
If only you'd known about those facts. Any other hands?
Sorry, just back to the cheating point. Actually, quite a funny anecdote is one of my friends is married, and he got married quite young. And he said to his wife, like, look, we've been married 5 years, we're only we're only about 28, I'm gonna download one of the dating apps, I'll be very candid, you can have a look at it a bit, I just wanna see what I can get, I just wanna have a bit of fun. So he did, and she was like, yeah, go for it, who cares, dating apps aren't cheating. He downloads it, she was like, but the catch is, I get to download it too. So he downloads it, like ab pictures ready to go. She downloads it, bikini pictures ready to go. And he was like, well, the joke was on me, because next thing I know, she's got 40 matches talking to all these men. I've got like one pitiful like match of like some girl that's like, oh, like you're Hungarian, so am I. But like, it's just so funny that they didn't even consider that as like like if you're out with your husband and you're talking to a girl at the bar, you'd be like, what the hell is going on? But because they were like both sat next to each other, like doing it, it was just like treated so like lightheartedly. I don't know, like.
Was there a test me pointed to this lady?
I was like, rookie mistake.
Did you say your name?
The point I would make about the information piece, that when I was at university, a lot of my friends had it, and it was an easy way of meeting people they might otherwise have met, but kind of hadn't come in contact with, because you can immediately see these few things, like where they're living, and of course they do, and kind of it's like a fast track way of meeting people that maybe you might have met. And I've had a few friends who have successful relationships, but nobody who I know who lives in London who's had the same. So I feel like in a way it was just a way of making the pool of people they might have met from university just a little bit bigger, and that's why it succeeded.
Okay. All right.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Just on that basis, when it says met online, it doesn't necessarily mean through a dating app, does
no,
it?
not
So
necessarily. It could be met through,
everybody's got hugely extended social networks through Instagram and Facebook, and that counts as well. So, the focus being solely on dating apps is probably inaccurate
No, I think,
in terms of that stat.
I think you're right, and I know lots of people who've met that way. I'm quite conscious that Agatha has reached the end of the line. Her flag has gone up, so it's my job now to try and sum up this incredibly interesting and quite fun conversation. So we started with Susie, who talked very eloquently about that abundance of choice. Too much jam is what I've taken away from that. Too much jam is a problem. Less jam can be better. And Zav talked about that sense of FOMO that you have if you're single, and actually you're happy being single, but you sort of feel pressured to engage in a world that you don't necessarily want to engage with, although he says he has softened his position, and actually dating apps, when you're in the mood, are great for you. But is it Diora? Diora talked about the sort of societal pressure to be single and how we all went, Zav, and why should we all do that? And that's something we should challenge in ourselves. Things that I would say we have learned is if you are going to meet people online, take it offline as soon as possible. So quite a few people said that. Dior, I think, again said about, the worst thing is projecting onto people a personality that isn't there. And as soon as you take it offline, the better. Treat it like a game. A couple of people said that, and don't go on into thinking you're going to find the one. I think it was Mara, I can't read my writing, who said that. Sorry? Maria. It was Maria who said, don't go into thinking you find the one. You're more likely to enjoy it. Wear one of those horrific face masks. Ben, you sort of made that point that you've done a little thinking about this, and you're not necessarily going to meet someone online because there are all these different types of people who are lurking online. You've got the lurkers who don't say anything, the sort of people who are just seeking affirmation, the people who want to just look, swipe, or even talk like a pen pal, and then you've got the people who want relationships, and then you've got the people who want sex. So we're all swimming, all these different people swimming in this pool, not necessarily looking for the same thing. Someone mentioned how the art of conversation has got lost, and I think that is probably true to an extent, that we've seen that change in the last year. And Olivia said people seem to be scared to go up to a lot of people. Obviously, there's a lot of rejection involved in this. And Stephen, I really loved your point about how rejection is difficult, but it's okay if we learn something about ourselves. And I think that's quite an interesting aspect of it, that we can all cope with this as long as it's part of a personal growth process. I did find the stuff about the age, men dating downwards 10 to 15 years, and men wanting to date women 8 out of 10 and women being happy with a 6 out of 10, all of that stuff. I hate it. But it's there and it's prevalent. It's really interesting. I loved your mum being the original ghoster. I think that's the best thing I've ever heard. But I think if there's one takeaway, it's that there are a lot of people in the single room, and Susie said, why aren't you all dating each other? So now I will leave you to go and do do that. And thank you, all the speakers, for coming in, contributing and being so
Sharon is one of the visible rough sleeping women in the UK. But the thing is, most homeless women are not visible. They're sleeping in hidden places, out of sight and not counted. Shelter puts the figure of homeless people in Britain at 320,000, with about 14% of them being women. That number is rising disproportionately. Shockingly, 1 in 4 women report a sexual assault on the street in any 12-month period.